I agreed to marry Nico Santoro because my father said I'd lose everything if I refused. I walked into that church expecting to find a monster, but I found a man far too dangerous to ignore. He barely looked at me, convinced I was just a party girl, empty and easy to forget, until the night he discovered the truth I'd never told anyone. I was still a virgin, and, in that instant, the arrangement that was supposed to trap me became a mafia boss's obsession. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout-out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Deal That Signed My Name. Morning in Palermo came through my bedroom window before the alarm. I'd already been awake for about 20 minutes, lying on my side, watching the light slice through the curtain and draw a pale line on the wall. I had a constitutional law exam at 11, an overdue paper I needed to finish by 9. And the smell of coffee from Stella's apartment on the floor below, rising up through the plumbing as if life were still light, and I were still a person with an exam and a paper and plans made to last the whole day. That's when the doorman buzzed the intercom. "Miss Shaw, your father's car is at the entrance." I looked at the clock. 7:40. My father didn't send a car on a school morning. My father never sent a car, actually. I took cabs. I walked. I rode with Stella. I hitched a ride with any friend from school. Arthur Shaw showed up in my life at Wednesday dinners and in newspaper headlines. Not on Thursday mornings, before the exam, before coffee, before I had time to prepare anything. I put on jeans, a black top, pulled my hair up on top of my head. I went down thinking about 1,000 things. An information leak, a political scandal, some party photo of mine that had ended up in a gossip rag. It was always something along those lines. The daughter of a famous politician doesn't get normal days. She gets days when nothing has blown up yet, and the silence before it is the loudest of all. The driver opened the door. He didn't greet me. He just tilted his head and got straight to the message. He asked for you to come to the office. I have an exam today. He said he knew. I swallowed the rest of my sentence. I got in the car. The trip to Arthur's office led downtown to the Old Quarter, to one of those dark stone buildings where politicians paid rent to pretend they worked closer to the people. The sun was still low, orange and lazy, and the streets of Palermo had that sound of a city that just woke up, stalls being set up, street sweepers along the curb, the smell of bread coming from a bakery on the corner we passed too quickly. I crossed all of it staring out the window, counting trees so I wouldn't think. His office door was ajar. I pushed it open without knocking. Arthur was standing behind the desk, hands braced on the top, staring at an opened envelope. When he saw me, he closed his eyes for a second. That kind of closing his eyes my father only did when he was about to tell me something he didn't want to hear himself. "Sit down, Evelina. I'd rather hear it standing. Sit." I sat. He came around the desk, pulled out the chair across from me, sat too. It was a scene he had rehearsed. I could see it in the way his hands trembled more than he wanted me to notice. "I've closed a deal. With the Santoro family." The word hung in the office like the smell of something burning. Santoro. That wasn't just any last name in Palermo. It was the word mothers whispered when their kids came home late. It was the sign nobody read out loud. It was the shadow that came down from the hills at the end of the afternoon, and that everyone pretended not to have seen. "What kind of deal, Dad?" He took a deep breath. "Marriage." I laughed. It wasn't an amused laugh. It was a short, sharp sound that escaped before I could hold it in. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a test. I thought it was anything but the truth. "You're kidding." "No." "To whom?" "Nico Santoro, the heir. Saturday." The word Saturday landed on the desk between us like a china plate. Today was Thursday. I looked at him waiting for the denial, the explanation, the bad taste joke. Nothing came. All that came was his stare, fixed on the envelope beside him, fleeing my face as if I were a light too bright to face head on. "I'm not going." "You are." "I'm not going, Dad. I have an exam in 2 hours. I have a life. I'm 23 years old. I'm not some game piece you drag out when you need to cover a hole. Evelina." "No." He slammed his hand on the desk. It was the first time in years I'd seen Arthur Shaw lose his composure. The coffee cup shook. The envelope slid. The silence afterward was heavier than the blow. "You'll understand one day, Evelina. Today you won't, but you will. What kind of father says that to a daughter? A father who's out of options. And what option is this that involves locking me up with a mobster?" He fell silent. He pinched the bridge of his nose, the way he did when he had a migraine. I saw the age in his face for the first time, concentrated in a way it hadn't been before, Or maybe I just never stopped to look. I saw the gray beneath his eyes. I saw his hands, too old for someone who still climbed onto podiums. If you don't accept, I'll have to disinherit you. The sentence came out flat. No flourish, no care, none of that fatherly tone he'd always saved for me. His eyes trembled at the end of the sentence, as if the hardness were the shell of something much worse he couldn't tell me yet. I felt the air in the office get thinner, as if the window behind him had absorbed all the oxygen that was left. I put my hand on the chair so I wouldn't float away. You're threatening me. I'm protecting you. It doesn't look like it. I know. We sat in silence. The clock on the wall kept ticking. Somewhere, a car went by, honking. Life outside hadn't stopped for me. I looked at the envelope. It was sealed with wax, red wax, with a raised seal, a letter S. Dad. Yes. Look at me. He looked. His eyes were red. I'd only seen Arthur Shaw cry twice in my life, at my mother's funeral, and on the night he lost his first election. That would be the third. I love you, he said. Believe me. I used to. I stood up, grabbed my bag, walked out of the office without looking back, because if I looked, I'd go back and hug him and forgive him too soon, and my body still hadn't decided whether it would give in or break. In the car on the way back, the driver said nothing. The city passed by the fogged-up window. I didn't cry. I just stared at my own reflection in the glass. Hair pulled up, black top, the eyes of a woman who'd left home with an exam to take and was coming back with a wedding set for Saturday. The reflection looked back at me as if it already knew what was going to happen, as if it had been waiting for me to reach that window to finally tell me. I got home, climbed the stairs slowly. Stella was sitting on the step of my floor, holding 2 cups of iced coffee, sunglasses on her face despite the windowless hallway. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, holding out a cup. My best friend intuition never fails. Stella, talk to me. I'm getting married Saturday. She went silent for 2 full seconds. Stella Conti never went silent for 2 full seconds. She was the type who thought out loud, who filled every pause with something, who treated silence as a flaw to be fixed. Those 2 seconds were honestly the most terrifying thing about the morning. To whom? Honey, Nico Santoro. She took off her glasses. Her eyes widened slowly, like slow motion. The Santoro. That one. The one from the hills. That one. The one they say. That one. Stella. She took a deep breath, set both cups on the floor, hugged me right there, on the step, without asking anything else. That was Stella. She didn't waste time asking what was already written all over a person's face. You want to run? She whispered. We'll run. I have a cousin in Catania. I laughed against her shoulder. It was a wet laugh. I wish I could. Why? Because he'll disinherit me. She pulled back a little. She searched my eyes with that way of hers, the one that warns you before it drops a truth. Evelina, with all due respect, screw the inheritance. It's not the inheritance, Stella. It's him. I can't leave my father alone. I looked at him today, and he looked old. He looked afraid. Stella didn't answer. She just took my hand and squeezed, and stayed like that, without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. And like that, sitting on the step with 2 coffees going warm between us and the morning outside going on as if nothing had changed, I cried for the first time that day. The days between Thursday and Saturday passed without leaving a mark. I didn't go back to school. I didn't answer the calls that weren't from my father, and weren't from Stella. I tried on a dress that came in an ivory-colored box, sewn to the exact measurements no one had asked me for. The fabric was heavy, satiny, with a discreet lace at the neckline, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with me. Someone knew my body better than I wanted to think about, and that unsettled me in a way I couldn't name. I swore something to myself, in that gap. I swore that man, whatever his face, his size, his age, would not see a single tear of mine. I'd walk into the church with my spine straight. I'd walk out of the church with my spine straight. Whatever came after would be my problem. But inside that ceremony, I would still be Evelina Shaw. And Evelina Shaw didn't cry in front of the people who bought her. Saturday dawned with a clear sky. I hated that. The makeup artist worked in silence. The hairstylist, too. Stella came into the room twice, held my hand twice, left without saying anything twice. The dress was heavy, heavier than it looked, with a small train that dragged across the cold floor of the room. I went down the stairs carefully so I wouldn't trip, and my father waited at the bottom, in a tuxedo, with a look I couldn't read. You look beautiful. I know. He swallowed, held out his arm. Let's go, Dad. Yes. If I ever find out that you lied to me today, I won't forgive you. I know. The escort was waiting on the street. Black cars, black windows, Men in black suits standing on the sidewalk with that posture of people who never fully relax. I got into the middle car. We crossed Palermo. I looked out the window the way I had 2 days before, this time counting churches, not trees. There were more churches in Palermo than trees. In that moment, it seemed like a cruel joke from the entire universe. The church appeared around the bend, pale stone, a wide staircase, a crowd held back behind velvet ropes. I hadn't thought about a crowd. I hadn't thought about a photographer. I hadn't thought about anything beyond the altar. The car stopped. My father got out first. He held out his hand. I placed mine over his, and it was the first time since Thursday that I'd touched him. I felt that he was trembling. We climbed the staircase. We crossed the cold stone vestibule, where the smell of candles and old flowers blended into a ceremony perfume that hit my nose before I was ready for it. The organ began, and I walked in. The nave was long, white, gold, full of people I didn't know. I looked ahead because there was nowhere else to look. And it was there, at the end of the aisle of stone and flowers and stained glass light, that I saw for the first time the man I was going to marry. I had imagined an old man with a belly, hunched back, spotted hands. I had prayed for it to be an old man, because old men you survive, you wait, you tend, you inherit, you move on. An old man was a calculation. An old man was a number I could solve. What stood at the altar was not old. It was a tall man, early 30s, broad shoulders inside a black suit cut as if he'd been born in it, dark hair combed back, a straight jaw, hands clasped in front of his body with a calm that didn't seem natural. It seemed cultivated. And the eyes, I saw his eyes from a distance, were the color of ice melting in a glass of whiskey. Cold, beautiful, completely empty. He looked at me, looked quickly, assessed, went back to looking ahead. That was it. It wasn't a groom's look. It wasn't the look of a man who wanted. It was the look of someone checking whether a delivery had arrived at the right address, and, once the address was confirmed, filing the information away and moving on. I felt the air leave me, not because of his beauty, because of his coldness, because an old man I would survive. That man there, the way he looked me over from head to toe in half a second and glanced away. That man was going to destroy me, and he was going to do it without even noticing. My father gave me away. The priest spoke in Latin. The priest spoke in Italian. The priest spoke in some language I was no longer hearing, because my head had gone off somewhere between the step of my apartment and my father's office, trying to understand exactly where my life had made a left turn without warning me. At some point, someone asked if I accepted. I said yes, because the air in my lungs chose for me. At some point, he said he accepted too, and his voice was deep, low, without any hesitation. He didn't say my name with tenderness. He didn't look at me during the vow. The kiss came at the end. It was a touch. Closed lips. 2 seconds. Cold as the stone of the nave. I closed my eyes on instinct. When I opened them, he had already pulled away. The church erupted in applause. I smiled because a bride smiles. He didn't smile. He offered his arm. I placed my hand on it. We crossed the nave together without exchanging a word. Outside, the sun hit the steps with a violence it hadn't had before, and I saw for the first time his escort, men different from my father's, quieter, more alert, their eyes sweeping the crowd in a way that wasn't protocol. It was instinct. They cleared a path. An armored car stopped at the foot of the steps. He held the door, waited for me to get in first. That was the only kindness of the day. I sat. He sat on the other side. The door closed with a heavy, final click. The driver started the engine. Palermo began to slide past the window like always. Indifferent. The same markets. The same stone streets. The same people who didn't know and didn't need to know what had happened in that church. The man beside me said nothing. Didn't look at me. Took his phone out of his pocket. Read a message. Put the phone back in his pocket. I looked at him out of the corner of my eye. The line of his jaw was sharp. His hand rested on his knee, relaxed. No ring yet. The ring was still in his palm, forgotten, as if he'd forgotten too that I existed. I swallowed, looked ahead, dug my nails into my own palm so I wouldn't tremble. I repeated the promise under my breath, inside my head, that no one in that car heard. This man does not see a single tear of mine. This man does not see a single tear of mine. And it was the first promise I broke before the night was over. Chapter 2. Separate rooms, same roof. The Santoro mansion appeared on the road as if the road had been built to end there. High wall, wrought iron gate, 2 men in black suits at the gatehouse. The car went in without having to stop. The gravel crunched under the tires with that dry sound that seemed final, like a vault door closing. To the right, behind a hedge of fuchsia bougainvillea, the Sea of Palermo opened up like a blue blade all the way to the horizon, almost unreal against the orange end of the afternoon. It was beautiful. I hated that too. The reception was in the main hall. Long tables covered with immaculate white linen, crystal chandeliers throwing reflections onto the marble walls, wine that cost more than my first semester of college. I greeted names I didn't keep, smiled at faces that smiled back without reaching their eyes, and ate half of what they put on my plate. I took a sip from every glass they passed me. I kept my spine straight. I discovered it was easier to look serene when my body was busy chewing. Nico moved through the hall like a host who had already seen that scene 100 times. He shook the hands of older men, kissed the cheeks of older women, laughed at a joke someone told under their breath. He laughed with his mouth, not with his eyes. I paid attention to that and stored it away as evidence of something I still couldn't name. At some point, he crossed the hall toward me, stopped beside me, placed his hand on the side of my waist. A quick, professional touch, like a manager arranging a product in a display case. The heat of his fingers went through the fabric of the dress in a way I chose not to register. "Are you tired?" "No. We leave here in an hour." "That's fine." He held my gaze for 2 seconds. That was the longest sentence he'd directed at me all day. He walked off, didn't come back. The drive to the residential part of the property was short. The main mansion sat on another stretch of the grounds, closer to the sea, hidden behind an avenue of cypresses lined up on both sides like tall, dark sentinels. Don Vittore waited at the entrance with his hands clasped behind his back. He was a tall, thin man, white hair combed without a single strand out of place, the posture of someone who had never bowed his head to anyone. He kissed my hand with the courtesy of another century. "Welcome to our home, Signora Santoro." The new surname struck my chest like a stone. I smiled, thanked him, crossed the threshold. The hall was cold. Everything was cold in there. The gray marble of the floor, the yellowish light that warmed nothing, the stares of the on-duty staff posted like statues in the corners. The smell was of wax and old stone. A large, stocky man, with the look of someone about to tell a joke no one had asked for, stepped forward. "Gennaro Russo, Signora, the boss's driver. From now on, I'll be yours too. I'll warn you up front. I drive well, I talk little, and I only laugh when it's worth it." I laughed in spite of myself. It was the first funny thing all day. "Noted, Gennaro. You'll get used to it fast." He winked slightly. "In here, the only thing worse than my silence is the boss's." Behind him, a thinner, more elegant man in an impeccable gray suit held out his hand with the precise gesture of someone who has already measured the right distance for every handshake in life. "Tommaso Ferri, consigliere of the house, lawyer by training. Anything you need guidance on, come to me." It's part of my job not to be shocked by anything. Should I find that reassuring? You should find it useful. I smiled, too. That man was going to be more dangerous than Gennaro. I'd already figured out. Nico appeared behind me without making a sound. I hadn't heard his footsteps on the marble, and that unsettled me. Men of that size should make noise as they approached. It was the natural law of things, and he seemed proud of breaking that rule, too. "I'll show you the east wing." We went up the staircase. The hallway was wide, dark, lit by iron sconces that gave off an insufficient, dramatic light, as if the house liked keeping shadows in its corners. On both walls, portraits of dead people watched me pass. I didn't look back at a single one. He stopped in front of a set of double doors. "This is the main bedroom." He opened the door. "Yours." I looked inside. It was spacious. An enormous bed covered in cream-colored linen, a balcony with half-open shutters that let in the smell of sea salt, and a rectangle of sky darkening outside. My suitcases were open on the trunk in the corner, shoes arranged by pair, clothes already hung in the closet. Someone had been there before me. Someone had touched my things, folded my clothes, chosen the order of my dresses. I felt a small, controlled wave of anger, and I swallowed it whole. "And you?" He pointed to the next door down the hall, 3 meters ahead. "There, separate rooms," I said, in a low voice. "Yeah," he answered, in the same tone. "I thought it was better. Better for you, or for me?" He turned around. It was the first time he'd truly looked at me since the altar, and his look, up close, was worse than from a distance. It wasn't cold. It was absent, as if he were looking, but the rest of his body were somewhere else, tending to other urgencies, handling problems I'd never understand. For you, Signora. Don't call me Signora. What should I call you? By my name. He hesitated half a second. I saw the second pass, counted every fraction of it. Good night, Evelina. He closed the door behind him without making a sound. I stayed there, in the middle of the new room, with the heavy dress trapping me like armor, the shoes squeezing my ankle bones, my hair still pinned in a bun that ached at the nape of my neck, and the sea beating outside through the half-open window as if nothing important had happened in the world. I took off the dress on my own. It took a while. The clasps were small, treacherous, made for someone else's hands. When the fabric finally fell to the floor in a circle around my feet, I felt 10 pounds lighter and 10 years older at the same time. The phone rang. It was Stella. Are you still in one piece? I think so. What's the house like? Beautiful. Freezing. And him? He sleeps in the room next door. What? Separate rooms. Stella. She took a while to answer. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the light of the lamp on the nightstand. It was a weak, yellow light that made everything older than it was. Honey. Yes. Is that better or worse than if he'd insisted? I don't know. I think worse. Why? I thought about the way he closed the door, about the fact that he hadn't even hesitated, hadn't looked at me with curiosity, hadn't seemed to need a second to make that decision. Separate rooms. As if it were obvious. As if I were a detail of the contract that didn't even need a draft. Because it means he doesn't want me even enough to pretend. Stella was silent for a while. Then she said, in that voice of hers that knew how to be hard when it needed to be, and soft when I least expected it, Evelina, listen. You weren't made to be wanted just enough. You were made to be wanted too much. When that man realizes it, he's going to choke. Just give it time. Stella. Yes. Thank you. Always. I hung up. Turned off the light, lay on my side, facing the wall that separated my room from his. I didn't hear a single sound from over there. No footsteps, no voice, no creak of furniture. Maybe he'd fallen asleep immediately, like someone finishing a task and moving on to the next. That bothered me far more than it should have. The days that came after passed compressed, one on top of the other. Breakfast at 8 in the small dining room, alone, with the newspaper left on the table as if someone had gotten up seconds before I arrived. Lunch at 1, alone again, with the surrounding silence of the staff that was polite and suffocating at the same time. Dinner at 8 in the big dining room, with Nico on the other side of the long dark oak table, reading the paper between one forkful and the next. The light of the chandeliers carving shadows into the angle of his jaw. I tested it. On Monday night, while he folded the first page, I asked, "How was your day?" He turned the page without looking up. Ordinary. And he kept reading as if I hadn't said anything worth more than that single word. I swallowed the urge to throw the glass of water in his face, ate the rest of my plate in silence, got up, and went up to my room. I learned fast. I didn't ask anything else at the dinners that followed. School was suspended, temporarily. That was exactly the word Tommaso used on Tuesday, when he explained to me with a calibrated smile that the boss preferred I not leave the property until certain arrangements were finalized. I asked what arrangements. He answered that it was for my safety. I asked safety from what? He smiled again, changed the subject with the skill of someone who'd been doing it since childhood, and I understood that conversation had ended before it began. Gennaro was the only bright spot of those gray days. He'd show up in the garden when I went out to breathe a little of the salt and rosemary air that came off the sea, pretend he was inspecting the car with enormous seriousness, and say things like, "The sea's beautiful today, signora." Yeah, more beautiful than the boss in the morning. Gennaro. I didn't say anything, and I'd laugh. It was a small laugh, almost breathless, but it was the only one that fit in those days. Wednesday, late afternoon. I was coming down the marble staircase to get a book from the library when I heard the sound in the east wing. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a wrong sound. A male voice, harsh, with that controlled tone that's more threatening than a shout. And over it, almost swallowed by the silence of the hallway, a small female voice, apologizing for something I couldn't make out. I stopped in the middle of the step. I listened. "I already told you not to touch that damn paper, you idiot." "Sir, I was just cleaning." I said, "Don't touch it. Are you deaf?" I came down the rest of the stairs with a firm step, turned the corner. The scene was simple and it was disgusting. One of Nico's men, I recognized the dark overcoat, not the face, was standing in front of one of the house's staff, a small woman, about 50 years old, with a dust cloth clenched in her hands. He'd grabbed her wrist, not with force yet, with that calculated force that was crueler than the grip, because it announced the grip, the force of someone who could squeeze whenever he decided. She was trembling. He was looking down at her as if he were looking at nothing. I didn't think. Let go of her arm. He slowly turned his head. I saw his eyes recognize me, and I saw the hesitation last a full second, and then I saw the hesitation go away. He didn't let go. I only learned his name later, when Nico called him from behind at the end of the hallway. "Bruno, go back to your room, signora. I told you to let go of her arm. You don't give orders in here. The signora is the signora in here." The sentence came out firmer than I expected. I hadn't planned to say it, but the second it came out, it stood on its own in the middle of the hallway, and none of the three of us could undo it. He stared at me. I stared back without blinking. The small woman, trapped between the two of them, closed her eyes as if she were expecting the worst and had already gotten used to expecting it. "Let go," I repeated. He let go. Slowly, without looking away from me. Like someone who wanted to make it very clear he was letting go by his own choice. Not because I'd asked. "You're going to regret this, signora," he said, his voice low and precise as a knife. "Maybe, but you'll regret it first." It was in that exact instant that I heard the footstep behind me. Just one, heavy, deliberate, with the weight of someone who doesn't need to announce himself because the hallway already changes when he enters. I turned around. Nico was at the end of the hallway, white shirt with the sleeves folded up to the elbow, tie loosened, hands empty at his sides. He'd been standing there long enough to have heard everything, and he'd stayed quiet enough not to interrupt either of the two final lines. His eyes were on the man, not on me, and his eyes, that time, were not absent. They were far too present, cold in a different way, the cold of something about to cut, not the cold of something already dead. "Bruno." Nico's voice came out low, almost polite. The man in the overcoat went pale even before the second word. "Boss, get out. Boss, get out." Bruno went down the hallway without looking back. The sound of his footsteps disappearing down the stairs was the only sound for a few seconds. The small staff woman was still trembling, her shoulders curled in on themselves. I turned to her, gently took the cloth from her hands, folded it, and set it on the marble side table in the hallway. "Go to the kitchen. Ask them to give you some tea. I'll come down in 10 minutes to see if you're okay." She nodded twice, her eyes moist, and left quickly by the service stairs. When she disappeared, the hallway was left with just the two of us and the silence between us, which was different from the silence at dinner. That one was empty. This one had weight. I turned to face Nico. I waited for him to speak. I waited for the scolding, the order to keep out of it, "That man works for me and you don't understand how this works." I waited for any of the sentences I'd memorized by heart since I entered that house. None of it came. He just stood there, 2 meters away, with those whiskey-gray eyes locked on mine. He wasn't looking at me the way you look at a new wife who stepped out of her role. He wasn't looking at me the way you look at a spoiled girl who took an action that wasn't hers to take. He was looking at me as if he were seeing, for the first time, a woman where before he had sworn there was only a name on a contract. "You're all right," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an observation that arrived too late to hide that it mattered. "I am." He nodded once, slowly, opened his mouth to say something, closed it, opened it again, as if the sentence had reached his throat and found another rule in there. "Good night, Evelina." He went up the rest of the hallway, passed by me without touching, a few centimeters away, and I felt the air change when he passed. A brief warmth, the faint smell of cedar and something darker I couldn't name. He went into his room. The door closed without a sound. I stayed standing in the middle of the dark hallway rug, with my heart beating in my neck, with the dust cloth forgotten on the marble side table, with the sea beating outside behind the thick walls of the house, as if the world kept spinning at normal speed and only I had stayed still. It had been the first time he'd looked at me as if I mattered, and I hated how much it affected me. Chapter 3. The Man Behind the Monster. The mansion's library smelled of old paper and sea air, a strange mixture I only found there, in that forgotten corner of the east wing. I spent the whole morning curled up in an armchair near the window, pretending to read a book I'd been holding upside down for an hour. The light came in at an oblique angle through the glass, drawing diamonds on the dark wood floor. The scene in the east wing wouldn't leave my head. Bruno cast out, the staff woman's wrist marked red, and the way Nico looked at me afterward, as if I'd just appeared inside a house where I'd already been living for weeks. I set the book down on the arm of the chair and looked at the hallway through the half-open door. His office was on the other side, in the west wing. I'd never gone in. No one had forbidden me with words, only with that heavy silence that surrounded everything belonging to Nico Santoro, like an invisible field that didn't need barbed wire to wound. I got up without thinking. The hallway was empty, my footsteps muffled on the dark rug, the afternoon sun slicing the floor into long, warm bands. The wood creaked slightly under the fabric, and I stepped slowly, as if the silence of the house were something I could break. I stopped in front of the oak door. I knocked once, knowing he wasn't there, because Gennaro had left with the main car before lunch. I pushed it open slowly. Nico's office was an extension of him, clean in an almost aggressive way. As if disorder were a form of weakness, he refused. Dark wood, an enormous desk with a leather top creased at the edges, a crystal ashtray with no ash, a tall bookcase of books that looked as though they'd been read methodically and put back with precision. It smelled of his cologne, and something metallic I couldn't name. I stopped in the middle of the room and breathed slowly, like someone entering a place that shouldn't exist. I walked to the desk. I didn't touch anything. I just looked. A leather folder was open on the top, with pages held by a silver clip, thin, aligned letters, evenly spaced. I read the first name without realizing I was reading. Maria Conti. Address in Catania. A monthly amount beside it, in euros. The second name. Rosalba Ferri. Address in Messina. Monthly amount. The third? The fourth. 23 names. All with addresses. All with amounts. All with the same regularity that indicated those payments were never forgotten. All women. There was no heading. There was no signature. No identification of the sender. But within one of the margins, written in pencil and handwriting I already recognized from the signature on the marriage contract, a short sentence, so that no one loses the roof her man left behind. I felt the air leave me all at once. You weren't supposed to be here. I turned. Nico was standing in the doorway, white shirt open at the collar, jacket draped over his forearm, his look neither angry nor surprised, tired. There was a heavy lightness in him that I didn't expect to find in a man like that, as if the day had cost more than the outside showed. It was the first time I'd seen exhaustion on that face. I didn't touch anything, I said, and my voice came out firmer than I expected. He came in slowly, closed the door behind him with the calm of someone who closed all the doors of his own life the same way, without haste, without violence, just with a definitive firmness that didn't need force to be felt. He walked to the desk, looked at the open folder, turned his eyes back to me. I know. I waited for the lecture, the low voice he used to cut people in two, the finger pointed at the exit. I waited for the coldness I'd already learned to identify before he even opened his mouth. None of it came. Who are they? I asked, because his silence pushed me out of myself. Widows, he answered, and his shoulders seemed to weigh more when he said the word. Of men who died in wars that weren't theirs. Of your family. Of my family. I put my hand on the corner of the desk so I wouldn't tremble. 23 women, 23 homes, 23 names written carefully in pencil, as if ink were too final for something he preferred not to admit even to himself. There was something monumental about that refusal to use a pen, as if by writing in pencil he kept the right to erase, even though he never erased anything. Why anonymous? I asked. He took a while to answer. He took off his jacket, folded it over the back of the chair with a precise movement, without looking at what he was doing. He braced both hands on the top of the desk and lowered his head for a second. I saw the shape of the matte gold ring with the S seal on his pinky. I saw the tense tendon of his left hand. The silence lasted long enough for me to understand it wasn't hesitation. It was the preparation of a man who rarely said certain things out loud, because pity shames more than hunger, he said, without looking at me. Not, and because I don't deserve the thanks. I didn't know what to do with that sentence. It hung between us like a confession too big for the size of the office, like a word spoken in a small room that suddenly seems to have not enough walls to contain it. Nobody knows, I said, in a low voice. Nobody needs to know. He finally raised his eyes. And you won't tell them either. It wasn't a request. It wasn't an order. It was a strange middle ground, as if he were asking permission without knowing how to ask, using the tone of someone who commands, because he never learned the tone of someone who pleads. I won't tell. He looked at me for far too long. That look that seemed to see everything and give away nothing was starting to give away something, and I wasn't ready to name what it was. Why did you come in here, Evelina? It was the first time he'd said my name with his whole voice. No irony, no distance, just my name, as if he'd just discovered that I had one, and that name, said like that, sounded different from what he'd expected. I wanted to understand, I admitted. I wanted to know if the man who threw Bruno out and the man who sleeps in a separate room were the same person. He laughed. It was a short sound, without joy, but without malice, like a muscle he hadn't used in years, and that hurt to move, but that still worked. They are, he said. That's the problem. I left the office with a controlled step. Only when I closed my bedroom door did I lean my forehead against the cold wood and breathe for the first time in an hour. The monster everyone feared carried 23 names in pencil in his own handwriting, and I no longer knew what to think of him. 2 days later, I came down the stairs to the entrance hall and heard shouting on the floor above. It was the visitor's office, a room on the second floor reserved for meetings with outside allies. The door was ajar. The voices came down the stairwell as if the whole house had become a sounding chamber, each word finding the marble and ricocheting downward with a clarity that seemed rehearsed. I recognized the first voice before I recognized the second. It was my father. "You can't prove anything, Greco," Arthur Shaw was shouting the way I'd never heard him, with a harshness that made me stop on the 5th step. "Not one signature, not one living witness. I don't need much, Signor Shaw." The second voice was soft, oily, the type that smiles while it threatens. "Lorenzo Greco. I just need a hungry reporter." I stood still in the middle of the stairs. My father had gone to the mansion for a meeting with Don Vittore. I knew that. I didn't know Lorenzo was with him, and I didn't know that was the subject. That specific tone of conversation that happens when someone feels cornered. "It wasn't out of ambition," my father said, and his voice came out hoarse, as if the word had scraped his throat on the way out. "I did it for the..." The door slammed. Someone on the other side shut it all at once, with enough force to make the picture on the hallway wall shake. The voices went muffled, distorted, without clear words. I went up 2 more steps to listen and stopped. I didn't need more. It wasn't out of ambition. I did it for what? For the career, for the position, for the money, for the alliance, for anything that wasn't me. I went down the stairs with heavy legs, crossed the hallway without seeing anyone, reached the outer garden and breathed in the sea air like someone who needed to wash a filth out of her mouth. The smell of salt came in strong, and for a second it was only that. Wind, sea, the sound of the waves down below breaking against the rocks of the cliff. My father had sold me, not out of threat, out of ambition. I didn't want to believe it, but what I had was that voice, that tone of someone caught in the middle of a lie, that I did it for the swallowed by the door before it reached me whole. I lifted my chin. I wasn't going to cry in the garden of a man who slept in a separate room. That night was the Santoro's formal party. The main hall, decorated in black and gold, was full of men in dark suits and women in floor-length dresses. The conversations overlapped in a dense layer, and there was the cloying smell of expensive perfumes, mixed with white wine and ambition. I came down the stairs with my hair pinned up, in a dark red dress Stella had sent over saying you need to be more beautiful than they expect. I was, and I didn't care. Nico waited for me on the last step. He held out his hand with the calculated naturalness of someone who knows he's being watched. I placed mine over his without looking at him. His fingers closed a second longer than necessary. "You're pale," he said, low, so only I could hear. "The Signora is fine," I answered, and let go of his hand. We crossed the hall as a couple, allies, greetings, counted smiles distributed with precision. At some point, Nico introduced me to a tall man, broad shoulders, a sharp-toothed smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dante Bellomo," Nico said, without intonation. "Of the Bellomo family, Signora Santoro." Dante bent his torso in an exaggerated bow and held out his hand for mine. Delighted. Finally, I held out my hand out of politeness. He held it an instant too long. Then, and I saw the gesture before I felt it, he touched his fingers to my forearm, in a casual touch that was in no way casual, measured to be noticed by the entire room without being able to be called what it was. "Nico hides his wife the way he hides his business," Dante said, and laughed to the room, not to me. I don't know which is more valuable. The temperature beside me dropped. I didn't look at Nico. I didn't need to. The air between the 3 of us had gone dense in a way I already knew from stories that ended violently. "Excuse me a moment," Nico said, with the smoothest voice I'd ever heard from him. "Signor Bellomo, we'll talk later." He guided me by the elbow to the other end of the hall. He didn't grip. He just guided, with a firmness that was different from possession, closer to protection, and I didn't know how to feel about that distinction. When we stopped near the window, I gently pulled my arm free. "I know how to take care of myself." "I know you do," he said, and the exhaustion in his voice surprised me. "But Signor Bellamo isn't a man you play knowing games with." I looked at him. My father's words shouting in the second-floor room came back. The folder with 23 names in pencil came back. The formal kiss at the church came back. Everything came back at once, and I no longer had room inside my own chest to hold so much. "I need air," I said. I went out the side door before he could say anything, crossed the terrace, went down the 3 stone steps, and into the garden. The noise of the party fell behind, replaced by the wind and the smell of jasmine rising from the low walls. The smell of the sea came forward. I breathed deeply once, twice, and only when the third breath came out full of a sob did I understand I'd been crying for a while without noticing. "Evelina." I turned. Nico was crossing the garden toward me. No jacket, the white sleeve of his shirt contrasting with the dark blue of the night. I stopped walking, wiped my face with my hand. "Go back to the party," I said. "There's nothing here. There's my wife." "Your wife is an arrangement, Nico." My voice came out louder than I wanted. "Don't pretend it's more than that when no one's looking." He stopped 2 steps from me. His jaw hardened. His eyes didn't. "You think I'm pretending. I think my father sold me out of ambition and you bought me by contract. I let it all out at once. I think that man in there touched me because he knows I'm property. I think the only thing I had was my life, and I lost my life one Saturday morning in a church where I didn't even know the groom's name." He took a step. I stepped back. He took another. I had nowhere to retreat. The low garden wall behind my heels. The sea down below, indifferent to all of it. "You don't understand the danger you're in," he said, and it was the first time his voice lost control, not out of pride, out of fear. I saw fear on Nico Santoro's face, and it was the most terrifying thing of my night. "You have no idea. Then explain it to me." "I can't." "Why?" He took my hand, not the wrist, the hand. His fingers laced through mine and stayed there, warm, slightly rough at the knuckles, the matte gold ring pressing against the back of my thumb like a small, real weight. "Because you'd be more afraid of me," he said, low, "and I can't stand the idea of you being more afraid of me than you already are." The air between us stopped. I didn't decide to move closer. My body decided for me, or he decided, or it was the night, the garden, the smell of jasmine and salt and the exhaustion of pretending none of it affected me. When his mouth touched mine, I'd already forgotten the party, the hall, the dress, my father's voice shouting I did it for the kiss wasn't formal. It wasn't quick. It was anger and desire and truth, sharing the same small space between 2 lips that had spent weeks avoiding each other. His hand rose to my face. Mine grabbed the fabric of his shirt at his chest. I felt his heart beat against the knot of my fingers, fast and heavy, and it was there I understood he was more afraid than I was. When we pulled apart, we were left without words, our breathing out of sync, the garden turning slowly around us. "I swore you'd never see me falter," he whispered. "I swore you'd never see me cry," I answered. He laughed without sound, leaned his forehead against mine, and we stayed like that for a moment, breathing the same air of the garden, with the party going on beyond the walls, as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis. I don't know which hurt more, having been sold by my father, or discovering that I wanted that man to never let go of my hand. Chapter 4. The Truth I Never Told Anyone. The morning after the kiss, Nico showed up in the dining room. He sat in the chair at the head, opened the newspaper, and said good morning without looking up. I stood in the doorway, holding my coffee cup as if it weighed more than it should, the heat of the porcelain lightly burning my fingertips. In 3 weeks in that mansion, he had never had coffee with me. He'd show up when I was already gone, or simply not show up. Good morning," I answered, and sat on the other side of the table. He turned the page of the newspaper. I filled my cup. The silence between us was no longer that icy silence of the first week, the kind that weighed on the chest like a stone. It was a different silence, with its own texture, a silence that knew the taste of the other's mouth. "You go to sleep late," he said, without taking his eyes off the paper. "Do you know what time I go to sleep?" I passed by the hallway. I looked at him. He didn't lift his head, but the corner of his mouth moved a millimeter. "You can go back to school," he said, after a while. "With an escort, Gennaro will go with you." I almost dropped the cup. Whenever you want." I didn't say thank you. I couldn't. I just lowered my eyes to the coffee and tried not to cry from a new kind of anger. That wasn't anger. but that didn't yet have a proper name for what it was. Gennaro drove me to school 3 times a week. He drove with one hand on the wheel and his elbow on the window, sunglasses even early in the morning, commenting on Palermo traffic as if every driver were a personal, ancient enemy. "Signora, that guy cut us off," he pointed with his chin. "And I swear if the boss didn't forbid me, I'd run his car into the first corner. Gennaro, do you have a license for that?" "Signora, I have a license for a lot of things. Running a car into a wall is the least of what I'd do today." Pause. "Today," I laughed softly, looking out the window while Palermo passed by in shades of pale stone and strong sun. It was the first thing that made me laugh since I'd entered that mansion. Stella found me on the second day, in the school hallway. She looked at me, looked at Gennaro standing 3 steps behind with his arms crossed, looked at me again with narrowed eyes. "You're back." "I'm back." "With an escort?" "With an escort." She pulled me by the arm into a corner, so close I could smell her perfume, something floral and urgent. She spoke into my ear with her characteristic speed, the words almost tripping over each other. "Did he hurt you? Do you sleep with him? Do you want to run? I have a cousin in Milan who hides people." "Stella." "What?" "No." She looked at me a while, narrowed her eyes to a slit. "You're falling for him." "No, you're falling for him, Evelina." "Stella, lower your voice. I'm going to kill." "Who?" "I don't know. Someone. You. Him. Fate." She took a deep breath, dramatic as always. "Tell me everything at lunch." That night, Nico called me to his study. Not the widow's office. Another room, smaller, with a lit fireplace despite the mild weather of Palermo that time of year. The smell of burning wood mixed with something citrusy, probably the whiskey he already had on the table. He was without his jacket, sleeve rolled up to the elbow. He poured 2 glasses of red wine, handed me one without asking if I wanted it. "You don't have to stay standing." I sat in the armchair across from him. He sat on the arm of his own chair, not on the seat, his feet on the floor and his knees almost touching the rug. It was a strange way to sit for a man used to presiding over meetings, and for that very reason, it held my attention. "My mother died in an ambush," he said, without warning, without preamble. I was 12 years old. I didn't answer. There was nothing to answer when someone dumps that like that, without a frame, as if the sentence had waited far too long to be said. "You asked me in the office why it was anonymous." He slowly turned the glass between his fingers. "It's because I was 12 years old, and nobody paid anything to my mother. She was already dead, but I remember the silence of the house afterward. I remember my father saying she'd died because of her surname, not his." A long pause, the fire crackling softly in the fireplace. I never forgot that sentence. "That's why you send money. That's why." I looked at him. The fire from the fireplace hit the left side of his face, and drew half of a man I didn't know, one half in shadow and the other in light, and I still didn't know which of the two was the real one. "My father is a politician," I said, low, letting the glass rest on my knee. "I grew up learning to smile for photos no one explained to me, to be introduced as Arthur Shaw's daughter to people who didn't even really see me. When he called me to the office to talk about the marriage, I thought he'd finally forgotten I existed as a daughter and remembered I existed as a piece. I looked at the reflection of the fire in the wine. Ma, I hate that he still has that power over me. He doesn't anymore." I raised my eyes. "Do I?" he asked, and the question came out without weight, without arrogance, as if he knew the answer and were only confirming what he already sensed. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He understood from what I didn't say, and neither of us touched the subject again that night. 2 days later was the dinner with the allies. A long table in the smaller hall of the mansion, low lights over the white tablecloth, the crystal of the glasses capturing the reflection of the candles, Don Vittore at the head, Tommaso on the left, Nico and me in the middle, and Dante Bellomo across from us, a rehearsed smile on his mouth, the look of someone who'd come to collect an old debt and was enjoying the process. I knew he was going to provoke before the second course was even served. "Signora Santoro," Dante said, raising his glass toward me with an elegance that was in no way elegance. "You're more beautiful by candlelight than by party light. Although, from what I'm told, too much partying was always your element. Too much partying for a Santoro, perhaps." The table went into that thin silence, of forks frozen and breaths held. Don Vittore stopped his fork in midair. Tommaso blinked once, slowly, like someone gauging how much that was going to cost. I felt Nico's hand tense on his knee, beneath the white tablecloth. I felt it before I saw it. His thumb pressed his own knee in a movement I'd already learned to recognize as the second, immediately before something terrible happened. I placed my hand over his, under the tablecloth. without looking at him. His fingers stopped in the same instant. Too much curiosity for a guest, Signor Bellomo, I said, in the lightest voice I could manufacture. You seem well informed about parties. Do you go to many? Tommaso smiled at his plate. Don Vittore went back to eating, his fork resuming its movement as if nothing had happened. I go to the ones worth remembering, Dante answered, his glass still suspended. What a shame. I smiled with all the calm I didn't feel. I remember all of them, and I never remember you. The table laughed. Don Vittore laughed his short laugh, without sound, but he laughed. Dante lowered his glass with a calculated care that was in absolutely no way care. Under the tablecloth, Nico's fingers laced through mine. In the car on the way back, he said nothing for a whole kilometer. I looked at the sea through the window, the lights of Palermo multiplying in the dark water. Gennaro drove in careful silence, the kind of silence that says, I'm not hearing anything. You can talk. You saved that man's night, Nico said, at last. I saved yours. I know. Another silence. The sea passing. The city receding. Tonight, he said, without looking at me, his voice too controlled not to have been rehearsed. You're going to sleep with me. Pause. I need to talk about the contract. I froze. The air in the car suddenly got small, as if the windows had closed on their own. Gennaro didn't turn his head, but I saw his shoulder rise a millimeter of genuine embarrassment. All right, I answered. It wasn't. We went up together through the east wing, the cold marble under my heels, the sconces casting a low, yellowish light on the stone walls. The door of the main bedroom felt heavy in his hand when he opened it. He went in first, turned on the low light of the corner lamp, left his jacket folded over the back of the chair. I stayed near the door, my fingers lightly touching the wood as if I needed the option to leave. Sit, he said, please. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands together in my lap. He pulled up the desk chair and sat facing me, his knees almost touching mine, his elbow resting on his own thigh. There was something different about the way he positioned himself, with no distance, no table between us. There's a clause, he began, and his voice came out with the weight of someone who'd rehearsed the sentence more than once and still hadn't found the right version. The contract requires an heir, to seal the alliance definitively. I didn't decide this. My father and your father decided it before we knew each other. I could wait, pretend I forgot, but you'd find out the worst possible way, and I'd rather you found out from me. I looked at my hands, my fingertips cold despite the heat of the room. I won't touch you if you don't want me to, he went on, but I need to be honest. There's a deadline, and the truth is, I no longer know what I want to do with it. I raised my eyes. What do you mean? He ran his hand over his face, a tired gesture I rarely saw in him. And I entered this marriage certain I'd fulfill the part of producing an heir the way you fulfill a business meeting. And today, at that table, when Bellomo opened his mouth, I understood that I would kill for a woman I had no right to call mine. He laughed without any joy. You ruined everything, Evelina. I looked at him. I looked at the yellow light of the lamp reflected in the window. I looked at the sea of Palermo outside, moving slowly and in silence as if there were no rush for anything. Nico. Yes, I'm a virgin. The sentence came out before I thought to hold it back, before I decided whether I wanted to say it. It was already in the air, and the moment it was in the air, I wished I could take it back. Not because it was a lie, but because it was the most mine of things I'd ever given anyone, and I still didn't know if that someone could handle receiving it. He went still. He didn't breathe for a length of time I counted without meaning to. His eyes ran over my face, searching for the joke, the sarcasm, anything that could justify the statement. He didn't find it, and the silence that settled into the room was bigger than the room. What do you mean? He said, and it wasn't a question. It was his brain trying to fit a piece that had just dropped to the floor. What do you mean I'm a virgin? I gripped the fabric of my dress with both hands so I wouldn't tremble visibly. I always have been. I go to parties. I drink. I dance. I laugh at the wrong jokes. I let people think whatever they want because I never cared to correct anyone who didn't ask. But I always believed I'd only give myself to the man I married. Always. I took a deep breath. I've never told anyone this. Not even Stella, who knows absolutely everything about my life. I'm telling you because you are, officially, the man I married. He laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised, without cruelty, as if the joke had finally shown up. Only the joke was him. It was all the judgments he'd made without checking. Then he went quiet. Then he understood. I saw the exact second he understood. His face changed from top to bottom, like something giving way layer by layer. His eyes softened first, then his mouth. Then his shoulders dropped a millimeter he probably didn't notice. Last, his hands, which he braced open on his knees as if he needed some kind of floor. I judged you, he said, and his voice came out hoarse, different from its usual timbre. I judged you by other people's mouths. I know. I didn't deserve to have you tell me this. I know. He stood, walked to the window, stood looking out for a few seconds, came back, knelt in front of the bed, between my knees, without touching me, his face level with mine. Evelina, he waited for me to look at him. He waited for real, with a patience I didn't know he had. You don't owe me anything today. Not ever. The deadline exists, but it's not your problem. It's mine. Nico. Yes. Look at me. He looked. I don't want to wait anymore, I said, and my voice trembled a little, but came out whole. I don't want to wait anymore because I've already decided. I decided in the garden when you took my hand and wouldn't let me go. I decided when you let me go back to school without turning it into a favor or a chain. I decided when I understood that you send money to women no one else remembers, and that says more about you than anything anyone ever told me. I held his gaze. I've decided. He touched his hand to my face, the first time without urgency, without underlying anger, without the pressure of a garden with an exit. Just his hand on my face, his thumb passing slowly along the line of my jaw, as if he wanted to be sure I was made of flesh, that this was real. Are you sure? I am. If you change your mind in the middle, we stop. I know. At any second. I know. He leaned in. The kiss was slow, in no hurry at all. It wasn't the one from the garden, charged with anger and adrenaline. It was another, slower, more whole, with the patience of someone who had finally understood that mouth was the first of a single series. He stood, went to the lamp, stopped, looked at me one last time over his shoulder. Are you still sure? Turn off the light, Nico. He turned it off. When the light went out and the room was left with only the faint blue of the sea outside, I closed my eyes, knowing that would be the first night I would belong to someone, and the first in which someone would belong to me back. Chapter 5. The Wife No One Saw Coming. I woke before the sun, and for a second I didn't know where I was. The light was different, more blue, more cold, still weightless. The sheet smelled of him, that smell of good wood and something citrusy I'd learned to recognize without meaning to. I turned my face slowly on the pillow and stretched my hand across his side of the bed. Empty. His side. Empty. But with the mark of his body still in the fabric, as if he'd just gotten up. I sat up. The mansion's main bedroom breathed in silence, the heavy curtains half open, and it was through that gap that I saw the sea, grayish blue, still, as if it too didn't know what to do with that morning. And I saw Nico. He was on the balcony, his back to me, leaning against the stone balustrade. He wore only the pants of his dark pajamas and a white shirt open at the back to the wind, his hair still damp, his broad shoulders against the line of the horizon. I got up without making noise. I took the silk robe he'd folded on the armchair, him, who never folded anything, and crossed the room barefoot. The wood floor was cold. The memories of the night were warm somewhere below my ribs, and I didn't want to stir them yet. They were mine. They were ours. They'd fit inside me later. The balcony door was pushed too. I nudged it. You sleep very little, I said softly. He turned, and it was in that half-second that I understood the morning. His eyes, always so controlled, were soft, not lowered, not surrendered, soft, as if someone had cleaned the glass from the inside. I was listening to you breathe, he answered, his voice hoarse from someone who hadn't yet spoken to anyone. I got tired of waiting for you to wake up from a distance. I felt my face heat. It was ridiculous, after everything, to still blush at a sentence. I crossed my arms over the robe and went to the balustrade. He made room, but only enough for me to lean against his side. His arm touched mine. Are you okay? He asked. It was a dangerous question. It had so many possible answers that I chose the shortest. I'm here, he nodded, slowly, as if that were enough. The sea began to accept light at its edge. A seagull cried far off. I didn't know, he said, without looking at me. I judged you by other people's mouths, and I, of all people, should know how other people's mouths lie. Stop, I asked softly. It's over. It's not over. He turned his face, and the new light caught his jaw from the side. It'll be over when I pay for it. You don't owe me anything. I do. His hand touched mine, there on the stone, and stayed. It didn't grip. It just touched. But today I won't start paying. "Today I want coffee with you." I laughed. It was a short, surprised, low sound. He looked at me like someone storing it away. "Coffee?" I repeated. "How refined. I know how to be refined when I want. You know how to be several things when you want." He took my hand. Just that. And, on that balcony, with the sea waking up, it was more intimate than anything that had ever existed between us. We had coffee at the little iron table. He'd had a tray brought up before I woke, little cakes, fruit, an espresso that was perfect because he knew exactly how I liked it, and that cut me in a beautiful way. We talked little. It was a full silence. At some point, his phone rang. He looked at the screen, turned it face down on the table, and I understood he'd set that day aside for me. "It's going to cause trouble," I said. "It is. Downstairs. I know." Stella called mid-morning. I answered from the room, lying on my side on the unmade bed, while Nico showered. I heard the water behind the door. "I'll be direct," Stella fired off. "You answered too fast. Something happened." "Stella, it happened." "Stella, you have the voice of a woman who slept." "I always sleep." "Not like that. That's the voice of someone who slept with company and isn't complaining." "I'm going to hang up." "No, you're not. I've known you since we were 16. I can tell your post-exam voice from your postman voice." I pressed the pillow against my face and laughed in a muffled way. When I came back to the phone, Stella was waiting, in silence, with that patience she only had when the subject was important. "Are you happy?" she asked, without irony. I thought, "I'm at peace," I answered. "And it's the first time in months. Write down what I'm about to say. Peace is rarer than happiness. Hold on to it." I hung up with a soft chest. The next 2 days passed, the way days pass when you're no longer trying to cross time. I ate with him, walked around the house with him. I went back to the library and read without paying attention, because he was reading on the other sofa, and that was too new. Gennaro brought me a book I'd mentioned once in the car. Once, and the man remembered. When I thanked him, he just tilted his head and said, "The boss asked." I just didn't screw it up. I went to laugh, and that's when Nico called me. The formal reception was on Saturday. Nico had warned me 2 days before, without flourish, in his way. Family heads, some allies, your father, a pause, and Lorenzo Greco. I'd frozen when I heard the name. "Why?" "Because your father can't get him away without a public reason. I'm going to give him one." "Nico, you don't have to do anything, Evelina. Just be there. I'll handle it." I hadn't liked it, but I'd trusted. It was a new word in my mouth when it came to him, and it still hurt me a little to use it. Not because of the word, because of the ease with which it came now. I came down the reception hall stairs in the wine-colored dress he'd chosen without consulting me, and that, I hated to admit, was exactly what I would have chosen. The hall was full. Low chandeliers, golden light, waiters in a line, conversations in Italian that slipped into dialects I still didn't quite understand. Don Vittore was in the center, receiving guests. Tommaso, the consigliere, circulated like someone taking the temperature. My father was in a corner, holding a glass he wasn't drinking, and Lorenzo Greco was near him, smiling. It was a smile I knew. I'd seen it in campaigns, at dinners, in photos where my father appeared in the background. Lorenzo was an ordinary man in everything. Average height, average face, well-cut suit, except for his mouth. His mouth had always known something the others didn't. Nico appeared beside me without making noise. He touched my back, lightly, and guided me to the center of the hall. "Breathe," he said near my ear. "It's not your night to prove anything. I know. You don't. But you will." Lorenzo approached before dinner began. He carried a glass in his hand and a wide smile. And behind him, 2 men I didn't know, but who were his, people who make up a chorus. "Signora Santoro," he greeted, tilting his head a fraction of a centimeter less than he should have. "I brought a gift for the evening." "You didn't have to, Signor Greco." "I did. I'm from another generation. I believe in tributes." He pulled a small envelope from inside his jacket. I recognized the paper before he opened it. It was the kind of envelope where printed photos are kept. "Mementos," Lorenzo said, loud enough for 3 circles around us to hear. "I thought it would be nice to show the Santoro family where you came from. The youth, the life, the friends." He opened the envelope. I saw the first photo. It was from a party 4 years earlier. Me sitting at the table, laughing, glass tilted, short dress. There was nothing in it, nothing at all, but he was holding it as if it had a confession on the flip side. I felt the room slow down. My father took a step toward me and stopped, because Don Vittore had raised an eyebrow and no one moved until the old man spoke. I was going to speak. I had the sentence ready on the tip of my tongue. Sarcastic, dignified, as big as it needed to be. I never got to use it. Nico stood up. He hadn't said anything up to that point. He'd been standing beside me, his hand resting on the back of my chair, and not even that hand had moved. But he stood, and the sound of his chair pushed back had the effect of a door slamming in the entire hall. "Lorenzo," Nico said, his voice low, in his way. "Before you keep showing your gallery, may I show mine?" He didn't wait for an answer. He took from the inner pocket of his jacket a folded stack of papers. It wasn't an envelope. They were sheets, several, with something printed and some handwritten notes. The silent work of Tommaso and Gennaro over the last months, the scale of which I was only now understanding. "Documents," Nico explained, with a calm that cut. "Tommaso spent 3 years putting it together. Transfers in the name of a shell company in Catania that receives a percentage of every public contract that passes through Shaw's office. Origin address of the transfers. Your account, Lorenzo." He held out the first paper. A copy of the blackmail. Messages with time and date. He held out the second. Photos you didn't show today. You kept those for yourself. The glass in Lorenzo's hand shook once. Just once. But I saw it. "This is absurd," Lorenzo began. "It's not." Nico didn't raise his voice a single note. "It's just heavy. You confuse the two because you never carried one." My father closed his eyes. It was a short gesture, of a man releasing a breath held for months. Don Vittore rose, slowly, in his way, that way of someone who knows the room will wait. "Lorenzo Greco," the old man said, "you are no longer welcome on this island." "Don Vittore, I can explain." "You can. Somewhere else. You have until tomorrow to leave Sicily. After that, I stop being polite." 2 of Nico's men moved from the corners of the hall without anyone having called them. Lorenzo was escorted out before the soup arrived. No one commented. The waiters started circulating again. The conversations came back, lower, more careful, the way conversations come back after a civilized execution. I was looking at the glass in front of me, without seeing it. "Evelina," Nico said, close. "Look at me." I raised my eyes. His were warm with an anger that hadn't yet cooled. "Your father's political enemies wanted to reach you," he said, slowly, "just for me, though the entire table was listening and pretending not to. Lorenzo is one of them. He's not the only one. Your father accepted this marriage because it was the fastest way to put you close to people who know how to protect you. It wasn't just business." I looked at my father across the hall. He was standing still, his glass finally empty, his eyes moist even without crying. I swallowed. "I need air," I said. Nico nodded once. "I'll meet you outside." I left the hall through the side door, crossed the hallway where, weeks before, I'd stood up to one of Nico's men over a staff member, went out to the terrace. The sea was on the other side of the house, but the smell reached here, salty, wide. My father came. He appeared with his jacket open, with an exhaustion I hadn't seen in him even during the worst campaigns. He stopped 3 steps away. "I know you don't want to hear me." "I don't know what I want," I answered. "But talk." He talked, without big apologies, without justifying himself with pretty sentences. He said he'd tried other ways out. He said he'd stayed awake the nights that needed to be stayed awake for. He said he'd been wrong not to tell me, and that he didn't expect a quick forgiveness. "I'm not going to give it either," I said, "but I'll try. It's more than I deserve. It's less than I wish I could give, but it's what there is." He nodded. He didn't come closer. He knew it wasn't time yet. "Are you okay with him?" he asked softly. It was a father's question. Finally, I thought, and I told the truth. "I am." Sunday morning. I went down alone to the garden before the sun heated up. The stone path wound between the olive trees down to the part where the land opened up to the sea. There was a stone bench there, leaning against a low wall. I sat and stayed looking at the line where the water changes color. He appeared as always, without noise. He sat beside me. He didn't speak right away. He waited. "I wanted to ask you something," I began. No beating around the bush. "Ask, do you want me to stay?" He turned his face. He took, in his answer, exactly the length of time of a man who understands the weight of the question. "I do," he said, "but I don't want you to stay because you signed. I won't be able to bear it anymore. If you stay because you chose to. And if I choose to go, I put you in the car with Gennaro and open the front door." I looked at him. I believed him. "I'll stay," I said. He closed his eyes. That was all. No theatrics, no grabbing. He closed his eyes for a second and breathed differently. "There's one more thing," I said. "Never again without the truth. With me, about me, around me. Never again." "Never again?" he repeated. "I promise." I kissed him there, on the bench, with the salt coming in through my nose and a seagull cutting through the light above us. It was a short kiss, a low laugh from him in the middle, a peace that didn't weigh. We stayed sitting in silence afterward, and it was in that silence that the sentence came back. It had been so much in passing that it almost slipped away. Before Lorenzo was taken out, Don Vittore had leaned toward Nico and murmured something I couldn't hear. Nico had answered without looking at his father, with that dry half-smile, and I'd caught only the end. Too low. It can wait. I didn't know what could wait, or for how long. I hadn't wanted to understand. In the moment, I was busy breathing. Now the sentence had come back, the size of a crumb stuck between the teeth. I looked at Nico from the side. He had his eyes on the sea, his hand on mine, his shoulder leaning against mine. He was at peace. I swallowed the question. I rested my head on his shoulder and let the sentence slip away. The peace was too new to scratch with a word. "I'll ask later," I thought. Later. He squeezed my hand, and the sea kept doing what the sea does when no one commands it. Lena here. That wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. I thought his love was enough. We'd burn the world down together. But in the Mafia, a wife isn't loved. She's measured by the child she carries in her belly. Months dragged on. Blood every month. Cold stares in the hallways. Whispers that called me barren. A mistake. Dead weight. Nico hid me behind doors, faced his father with a low and deadly voice, risked his own crown for me. That last night he held me against his chest, his fingers trembling on my back, and murmured, "You're mine. Only mine. The rest can go to hell." Then I found the letter, the date, the words he never said to me, the secret he'd been keeping since before he touched me on that wedding night. My heart cracked down the middle. The ground disappeared. Now I carry the suitcase hidden under the bed and a note in my hand that still smells of him. And what if the man who made me a woman had never truly loved me? And what if every kiss, every promise was just part of the plan? And what if I disappear tonight? And he comes after me not to save me but to destroy me? Because I know too much. And his love may be the last thing that kills me. Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Congratulations, your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia romance and billionaire romance, to our new Alpha King stories and our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. You can watch on our website, or download our official app from the App Store or Google Play. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book too, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also add any story to your watch list to save it for later, and easily pick up right where you left off. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please, feel free to interact. And whenever you'd like to reach us, just look for the Contact Us button. We read every message, and your opinion truly helps us grow. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to My Stories Romance. Calm and press play. Welcome to the family.